Alright, let's get back into our latest takedown of Second Thought. Just to recap, he's saying that recessions are caused by capitalists because they love stagflation and profit when the economy goes under somehow. Also, free market economists totally ignore the boom-bust cycle, and Richard Wolff is awesome. Plus, capitalists do bailouts and wars and stuff. And he can't even give a coherent description as to what a recession actually is. So yeah, we're dealing with someone whose dishonesty is immediately obvious to anyone who's even halfway well versed on the issue. But you guys wanted me to do the rest, so let's get back to it.
Small businesses are weak. They aren't as adaptable and strong as large corporations.
And that's exactly why we shouldn't burden the economy with regulations, minimum wages, and other price controls, etc., etc. Of course, that's not the story you're gonna get from him. He's not even gonna tell you that small businesses flourish under a free market, but are the first to go down with central planning.
Let's go back to 2008 for a second and look at JP Morgan Chase.
You see what I'm talking about? He's looking at the central banking system as though it's capitalism, when, as I pointed out last time, it's actually one of the planks in the Communist Manifesto.
Even as a bank, in a recession centered around the banking industry, with its profits being cut in half from one quarter to the next amid, quote, rising defaults in its mortgage, home equity loans, and credit cards, JP Morgan Chase still managed to have its stock price jump by 11%.
And here we have another outright lie. Basically, for the whole previous year, their stock had been hovering around $30 a share or so. Then, after a peak of $34.63 in October of 2008, the stock dropped to $11.20 by March of 2009. I have no clue where he got this 11% price jump from. Looks like he just pulled it out of his ass.
So, how do we stop recessions?
Simple. Stop injecting cheap credit into the monetary system.
They are built into our current economic system, capitalism. What if we just had a degrowth economy?
Wouldn't that be the Great Depression? I don't think people like that situation very much.
The truth is that the only context where an economy not constantly growing is a bad thing is under capitalism. When businesses have to choose between satisfying the needs of their workers and the needs of capitalists to generate profits, the latter always wins out in the end.
What none of these socialist morons seem to get is that those are the exact same thing! The problem is they don't understand the difference between money and wealth, and they don't understand the difference between having more money and making a profit. When that cheap credit gets injected into the economy by the central bank, everyone acts as if there's this big increase in investment money, but there isn't. It's an illusion. Consumption is still up, so they grab for resources that are still being consumed. In that situation, things haven't grown. There's not more wealth, there's just more money. And you can bray all the ignorant ramblings you want about profits in terms of dollars, but that doesn't mean they're making actual profits. You want to look at dollars not in raw numbers, but in terms of purchasing power. The injection of new money means that you have more money chasing the same amount of goods and services in the economy. That's true of capital goods that businesses need, as well as consumer goods. So if a company has made, say, 5% profit, but the inflation of capital goods is 6%, then while you're ignorantly bleating about the profits, this business is actually faced with a loss because the money they took in isn't able to purchase as many capital goods as it was before. And as I pointed out in the first part, that means employees are going to be demanding higher pay to cover for their loss of purchasing power. So how is the business owner getting anything out of the deal? Sure, in nominal terms it looks great, but in reality, his expenses have gone way up. The only exceptions to this are government and the banks, as well as crony corporations they subsidize with it, like the military-industrial complex. They get to use the new money first before inflation takes effect. That is the privileged class here, and that's what Second Thought refuses to look at.
Growth means profits for the capitalist class, and decline also means profits for the capitalist class.
This has got to be the stupidest fucking thing anyone has ever said.
Capitalist governments,
I take it back. Anyone who says the phrase capitalist governments is not worth listening to. It's like talking about dry water. Government cannot be capitalist. It's logically impossible. Capitalism is about private, voluntary trade. Governments are public and do everything by force.
So if they encounter a dip, it becomes a crisis, the burden of which they simply pass on to the rest of us.
Then why do so many of them close down entirely, or have to go into bankruptcy and restructure? And I mean long-established companies like Woolworths, which was taken down after the housing crash, or Westinghouse, which was bankrupted by onerous federal regulations.
In a socialist degrowth economy, basic services are provided on a universal basis, like housing, food, healthcare, childcare, and so on.
Yeah, we've seen how well that works. Just look at Cuba. No, thank you.
By taking them out of market mechanisms and the hands of profit-motivated capitalists, we remove the imperative for them to grow.
Which means the result is squalor, misery, and death. This has been the case every single time it's been tried, without exception. Cuba's hospitals, championed by socialist ignoramuses for decades, are among the worst in the world. This is yet another point I've been making over and over again for a decade. Socialists never listen. But the real takeaway from his comments here is that he doesn't understand what real growth is. Growth means producing more of what people demand. It doesn't matter if it's food, healthcare, cars, movies, haircuts, or whatever. It simply means nothing more than the improvement of everyone's lives. And the question is always, how do you do that with finite resources? Capitalism provides solutions for this, which he derides as growth. But not only does socialism not have any solutions for it, it just makes resources more and more scarce. Because, as I keep pointing out, their focus is on seizing the means of production, with no thought into how the means of production come into being to begin with.
And with that, we get rid of the idea that if growth ever stops, that life necessarily has to become worse to make up for it. In other words, the things that make life good are guaranteed independently of profit.
Here, he's just showing he doesn't understand what the word profit means, which is sad considering the number of times people have tried to inform him. Everything you do in life has costs, whether it's time, or money, or materials, or physical work, or whatever. Nothing comes without effort. Sometimes it's minimal, sometimes you have to put a lot into it, but there are always costs. Likewise, benefits might not even be monetary, but satisfaction, enjoyment, increased amounts of leisure time, whatever. If you think about it, that's the whole point of consumer goods. You take that action because you figure the benefit you'll get out of it outweighs the costs. In your own subjective evaluation, the value gained is greater than the value spent. That's all profit is. So when you're right, you profit. If you don't, it's a loss, and you write it off as a failure or a bad idea or whatever. This is what everyone does with every single action they take over the course of their entire lives. And if you think about it, how could it be any other way? But socialists want to deny this basic law of humanity. They want something for nothing. They want to gain all the benefits without spending any of the costs. But how is that even possible in a universe with scarce resources and the second law of thermodynamics messing up the plan?
With a planned economy, we can control more industries democratically, produce in line with our needs.
Yeah, he's getting this straight from Richard Wolff. I have a video taking down this idea in detail, showing how it cannot possibly work. It's called How to Make Tyranny Tyrannical. Check the cards and the description.
not randomly having every company producing as much as possible.
Ask me how I can tell you've never run a business in your life. Just go to any executive with a plan to do things randomly and always maxing out your productive capacity. They'll either toss you out on your pathetically ignorant ass or keep you around as a specimen of stupidity they can point to and laugh.
Instead of relying on profit to guide our investments, we could simply invest in the things we want to see happen.
Do you see what I mean? I know I cut him off mid-sentence here, but he is talking about things we want to see happen as if it's distinct from the reason why people invest their money. The fact is, companies are not about maximizing profit. That's one aspect, but there are others that may be, to some degree, mutually exclusive. By maximizing short-term profits, are you giving up a long-term position in the market? Or there's often a trade-off between getting maximum profit and getting maximum revenues. And he just mentioned producing as much as possible. But oftentimes that results in profits not being maximized. They might be able to make better profits by scaling back production a bit. Or they might be more worried about growth or market share or their positioning in the market, or just about the stability of their production and sales when facing an uncertain future. They have a lot of things to consider other than profits, and they have to pick a balance between all of these factors. In reality, corporations do not exist to maximize profits. They're there to maximize shareholder value, and value is a very subjective thing. Shareholders are people, and they care about a lot more than the dividends that go into their pocket. They care about the situation they live in. They care about the world their children will grow up in. They care about the environment. Pretty much all of the things that you and your friends care about, shareholders, being people, care about to varying degrees. So there are plenty of shareholders who'd be willing to see their dividends drop a bit if they know the company is delivering a safer product, or one that's better for the environment, or whatever. And history has shown that shareholders are quite willing to punish a company that lays off workers, or cuts their pay, or sells shoddy products, or pollutes the environment. What we have with people like Second Thought and Richard Wolff are people who are not well versed with how the real world works. Most of them have never worked a real job in their life, nor have they had any hand in running a business. They judge them from their ivory towers, having not the first clue how any of it works. And even more so, it really seems that this is coming from their imagination. In other words, they're thinking about what they would do in that situation. It's just more projection. It says a lot more about them than it does business owners.
Alternatively, think of something like a mutual aid network today.
You are aware those are free market inventions, right? Can we please stop talking about mutual aid societies and co-ops as if they're not a part of capitalism? Socialism is not about co-ops or mutual aid or whatever. You can set up all of these in a capitalist society. This is not about what you want to do. It's about what you'll tolerate in others. If other people don't want to participate in these, if they don't want to work at a co-op, if they want to set up their factory or whatever a different way, what are you going to do? As I've shown repeatedly, there are only two options. You're going to use force to stop them, in which case you're a dictatorial state, or you're going to allow it, in which case you're a capitalist. This is why socialists like Second Thought have to disguise it the way he just did.
Mutual aid doesn't do shit for GDP. GDP doesn't have any way of measuring something that's done freely.
Yes, which is why we shouldn't be using it! Simon Kuznets himself, the man who came up with it, said not to use it for this purpose. If you pay someone to mow your lawn, it shows up in GDP. If you mow your own lawn, it doesn't, even though the same labor is made for the same value. Something else Kuznets said not to do. He said not to include government spending in GDP. As I've shown in the past, this resulted in illusions like a bustling economy during World War II followed by a crash. When you remove government spending from it and look solely at private GDP, it tells a different story. And the story that matches reality. Capitalists don't care about GDP. They care about what customers and shareholders will respond to. And that includes the people who pay for and are the beneficiaries of co-ops and mutual aid societies.
Providing each other with services and sometimes goods, usually without money changing hands.
I mean, it's not as if I haven't pointed this out repeatedly. Check out my video, How to Fix Healthcare Without Spending a Dime. There's a segment in there on how the free market created mutual aid societies that, among other things, provided healthcare for their members. This was done because healthcare providers were part of the society, and so a doctor who was a member would see other members for free. It was government that put a stop to that by saying only insurance companies can do that, and that is not capitalism. That's government intruding into capitalism. Are you getting the idea of how he's trying to deceive you?
Within a socialist framework, the consequences don't have to be so bad, because the first priority isn't company profits. An economy that prioritizes human well-being would simply continue to do so even in the midst of a crisis, unlike a growth economy which is ready to sacrifice collective good for a small group of people's numbers to look better.
At this point, you should be able to craft my response for me. The only way to make profits in a capitalist society is to improve human well-being in some way, in the subjective evaluation of whoever's buying your product. And of course, that's why it's always capitalist countries that have done better in epidemics, droughts, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, and so on, while the socialist countries have been hurt the worst. Even within the United States, we see the difference. Look at Hurricane Katrina. The sector that was built by market forces actually weathered the storm pretty well. It was the part set up by government, their housing projects, that got hit the worst. And notice how, in all of those pictures of the refugees, it was a sea of African American faces. Or, go back to my Thanksgiving video. See how Plymouth Plantation, under what everyone would recognize as a socialist, even communist communal setup, experienced starvation. When they moved to a system more closely resembling private property rights, that turned on a dime, even as the drought continued another few years. You know, it's really getting to the point where I can debunk any socialist just by pointing to older videos of mine. Why don't they ever listen? Why don't they ever learn? Even parts like this.
We cannot keep chasing infinite growth on a planet with finite resources.
I mean, how many times have I debunked that? Pretty much verbatim. It's like they have their talking points and they don't think any further. He doesn't understand what growth is. It's not using more resources. It's figuring out how to make people's lives better with the scarce resources you do have. And no one has ever figured out a better way of getting the information on how to do that than with the price mechanism. We also have embedded in this a zero-sum fallacy and a wage fund fallacy, two other concepts I've debunked quite a bit.
This is something I get asked about a lot. How do I help parents or friends break out of their little propaganda bubble?
And the sad part is, he probably honestly believes he's not in a propaganda bubble himself. But while he spent 18 minutes spewing long debunked talking points, I was actually watching his video, listening closely for anything new he might have covered. We are the ones going outside our bubble. We read socialist authors from Karl Marx to Thomas Piketty. We've watched videos from Richard Wolff and Robert Reich and Hakim and Second Thought and all sorts of other people. We've listened to the arguments, we've reasoned through them, and we've crafted our response. We've found it easy to find the counter to these claims and assertions. We write thoughtful articles, produce informative videos, make compelling podcasts, all sorts of things that cover all of these socialists on YouTube, in politics, in the news media, or wherever. Show what they're saying and demonstrate why it's wrong. It'd be nice if the socialists just once would do the same thing in return, but they just don't. And it's incredibly frustrating because we've actually put a great deal of effort into this, and these repetitive arguments are tiring, especially when they fall on deaf ears. But I keep making these videos not because I like repeating myself, because I don't, but because there isn't just one response to these assertions. There are many and varied answers, which also tells you something. If you can come to a conclusion from many different lines of reasoning, you can be pretty doggone sure it's the correct one. Whereas, as I've just shown, the socialists just repeat the same talking points over and over again, almost verbatim. Just ask yourself one honest question. Given all that, which side is far more likely to be correct? So thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe, leave a comment, and go to donate.bogosity.tv to keep me doing what I do. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.